Bree, Sky News.
All right, well, let's return to what's been happening here in Canberra today and beyond the backpacker tax brawl, which is still going on. The government has announced, and the Prime Minister has announced, a 15-year infrastructure plan today, different projects in different parts of the country. But amongst the announcements today, there is going to be a proper study now on whether we fund our roads in the right way. At the moment, through fuel excise and vehicle registration. But maybe we should be doing it differently. What if we could measure through GPS how much driving each of us individually are doing and charge accordingly? With me now is the Minister for Urban Infrastructure, Paul Fletcher, for more on this. Thanks very much for your time. So you're going to have a proper study into this, and you're yet to announce who will actually conduct that, but this will happen next year.
We'll get underway next year, that's
You
right.
see some merit, though, in the idea, presumably?
Well, what Infrastructure Australia has recommended as part of the 15-year plan, which was provided to government earlier this year, and today we've announced our response, they've recommended a range of things. And in response, for example, we're going to have a national freight and supply chain strategy, which my colleague Darren Chester will lead the work on. But one of the other things they recommended was having a public inquiry into the question of how we fund our roads today and whether a more direct user charging approach would make sense.
And what's driving this, well, recommendation from Infrastructure Australia? Is it because vehicles are becoming more efficient, using less fuel? Some even use very little fuel, electric cars. They're not paying fuel excise.
Look, that certainly is one factor. So if you drive a 10-year-old Holden Commodore today, through the fuel excise system, you're effectively paying about 4.5 cents a kilometre to use the roads. If you drive a Tesla, 100% electric, you're paying zero through the fuel excise system.
Now, presumably you don't want to discourage people from getting electric cars.
And look, that is certainly one of the factors here. It's a complex issue.
No, but equally you need a revenue stream to fund roads.
So that is one of the pragmatic realities, that we spend as a nation about $25 billion on building, maintaining and operating roads. That money's spent by the state road agencies, so Road and Maritime Services in New South Wales, Vic Roads, Transport and Main Roads in Queensland and so on. Also local councils. Of the 880,000 kilometres of roads around the country, a lot of them are owned and operated by local councils. And one of the issues here is that regional councils, on average, the ratepayer contribution towards roads is around $1,700 per individual, whereas in the cities it's about $200. So there's actually a lot of really significant fairness issues.
Where the people living in regional areas are not being treated fairly.
Well, they're ending up paying more towards the cost of maintaining the roads, because you've often got councils in regional areas, remote areas, with quite long lengths of road to maintain, while a very thin road base, revenue base. Now, of course, there's what's called financial assistance grants from the Commonwealth which assist with that, but that's one of the areas that we want this study to have a look at. In other words, what are the arrangements today? How do they impact on different types of drivers?
So let's look at how it might work. If you drive more, and presumably that means people in country areas who do drive more, they may pay more?
Well, at the moment they are paying more.
Well,
they are paying
rates,
more through the rates and also through the fuel excise.
Yeah.
So let me emphasise, this is a study. It's to have a look at these issues.
Sure, but to tease it out, I mean, those in outer suburbs, if you're commuting from Penrith to the CBD of Sydney or Geelong to the CBD of Melbourne, potentially...
Again, they're paying a lot today through the per kilometre charge.
Yeah.
One of the issues here is if you move to a system where there is a more direct relationship between what people paid to use the roads and how much got spent on the roads, would that mean that, for example, the spending was better tailored to where the demand was? So would you find that you were spending more money, you'd allocate money more towards where there was heavier usage? At the moment, these decisions are taken essentially by politicians and by bureaucrats. Obviously, we're fine people.
Yeah, and you obviously base it on some data, but it'd be nothing like what you'd be able to achieve with specific information on what's being used.
That's right. So these are some of the things to look at in this study. I do emphasise that no government would go down this path unless we could be satisfied that it would involve, deliver better roads, be a fairer system, let traffic move around more freely on our roads.
And not disadvantage those in outer suburbs.
Well, absolutely. We want to make sure you wouldn't do this unless you could be satisfied that it was a better outcome and you didn't have people, significant groups of people, disadvantaged.
One of the differences between at the moment, you're right, that driving a long distance, you're paying for that at the moment through the fuel excise. But the time of day you drive, with the sort of option being looked at now, if you drive in peak hour, maybe you are charged more. If you choose or find a way to drive outside of peak hour when the roads are less busy, maybe you could save a few dollars.
So what I'd say about that is I think the first part of this exercise is looking at what the current system is, and that'll be a pretty public exercise. We'll be trying to share with people how much they're paying now, what the impacts of that are.
But is this something that will be looked at? I mean, it in some senses would become a congestion tax, essentially.
Can I make one point clear? That sort of charge, a congestion charge, which is used in places like London, Singapore, tends to be used in very concentrated, high-density cities. That's not really what we're talking about here. Any decision to do that would be a matter for state governments because they're the ones that have responsibility for the...
So you're not saying motorists should pay more if they're using the roads at the busiest time?
And indeed one of the principles here would be this would not be about getting more money into the system, extracting more money from motorists. It would be about finding a different method so that what people were paying, again bearing in mind people do pay substantial amounts today, but what they were paying was more directly related to their usage and more visible, because at the moment a large proportion of people don't know that they're paying fuel excise. About a third of people don't know that, according to research done by RACV.
I'm sure that's right. I'm sure that's right. But the thing is, there's so many benefits to what's going to be looked at here, but the one thing that I reckon would concern a lot of people is how do you gather the information? Are we talking here about a GPS device that gets installed in every car?
And look, absolutely, that is one of the questions. Privacy is going to be a key issue. And what's been the experience in other countries? For example, New Zealand has a direct road user charge for diesel vehicles, both heavy vehicles and diesel-powered light vehicles. A key issue there is you've always got to have a low-tech way. If people don't want to have a device in their car, then that's fine.
Who gets to access this information? Where did Paul Fletcher really go on Friday night? I mean, this is what I'm saying. People are going to be worried. Who gets to look at that?
And those are all issues that would need to be worked through. But can I say there's a whole lot of threshold issues before you even get to that. This is not something we would do unless we could be satisfied. And when I say we, I mean the federal government, but also state governments, because essentially the two levels of government come together, in fact, three levels, frankly, to fund our road system and recover the costs from citizens. Unless there was general agreement that a different system made sense, you wouldn't see this happening. So this is going to be...
And that gets me to the final question here about the time frame. You've said today 10 to 15 years.
Yes.
A lot of hoops to go through.
Absolutely, absolutely. So really what this is about is let's do a thorough exercise as Infrastructure Australia has recommended, and that is their job to think over the horizon, to look at whether the way we presently pay for and fund our roads is optimal, understand exactly how it works today, even quite arcane things like what are the budgeting practices in the state road agencies. One of the arguments is that we underspend as a nation on maintenance for roads. That's a false economy, but the reason we do it is because the state road agencies don't have certainty as to what their revenue stream is. So there's some pretty pointy-headed stuff here, it has to be said.
Absolutely.
But nevertheless, that's the sort of things this study will be looking at.
And it's a public study, you said.
Public study.
So people can make submissions.
Very much so.
And that'll all be announced next year?
It will be. So terms of reference, who's going to lead it, and it'll be very much about seeking feedback from the community, also providing a lot more information about how the system presently works. But as I say, if we were to do this, it's a 10 to 15 year journey. We'd need to be satisfied that it produced a fairer system, gave us better roads, let vehicles move around more freely, and you'd need to have all levels of government satisfied.
And it'd need to be bipartisan.
It would need to be all of that
stuff.
stuff.
It's interesting stuff though. Paul Fletcher, thank you very much. Appreciate it. We'll take a quick break.